What if one woman could rewrite the rules of power in Africa? Not with violence, not with greed, but with love, truth, and an unshakable belief in justice. In Womandela, Vincent Egbuson does not just tell a political story, he dares to imagine an entirely different kind of nation. Set in the fictional land of Namu, a country scarred by dictatorship and betrayal, the novel introduces a leader the system was never designed to produce, a woman, a reformer, a moral force. Womandela rises at a moment when power has lost its meaning. Elections have been stolen, the people have been silenced. And yet, instead of seizing power through the same corrupt shortcuts, she insists on something radical. The will of the people must speak. That single decision sets the tone for everything that follows. But this is not just a story about politics, it is a story about possibility. A vision where leadership is not domination but service. Where strength is measured not by control, but by compassion. Where a president can ask, in the middle of chaos, where is love? Egbuson blends satire, spirituality, and bold political imagination to challenge everything we think we know about African leadership. Through Womandela, he creates a figure who stands in direct contrast to the brutal regimes that came before her. Honest where they were corrupt, open where they were oppressive, human where they were distant. And yet, even this ideal is tested. Because power always changes the game, because people are never perfect, and because building a nation on love may be the hardest quest of all, welcome to Womandela. Not just a novel, but a question: what would leadership look like if it truly served the people? Executive summary. Womandela 2006 is a political novel by Nigerian author Vincent Egbuson, published by Craft Books in Ibadan. It is set in the fictional African state of Namu and centers on Womandela, a woman who becomes president after a period of dictatorship and turmoil. The novel blends satire, utopian vision, and spiritual quest to explore themes of good governance, gender, and social justice. Womandela embodies a new kind of leader, tolerant, honest, and egalitarian, explicitly contrasting with the corrupt, masculine regime she replaces. The narrative emphasizes love, truth, and freedom, the quest motif as political principles. Critically, it won the 2006 NDDC Kansara Wiwa Prose Prize. Scholarly commentary has analyzed Womandela from ideological and gender perspectives. Some critics hail it as a groundbreaking feminist vision of female power, while others probe its alignment with socio-political ideology, even coining the term womandelism. This report documents the novel's publication, history, provides a detailed chronological plot summary with key quotations, analyzes major and minor characters, identifies central themes: gender, identity, politics, spirituality, and narrative style, discusses its literary techniques and language, situates it in Nigerian cultural and historical context, reviews its reception and critical debates, compares it with similar West African literature, and considers its influence. A table compares editions, noting that only the original 2006 edition is known, and a timeline highlights publication and critical milestones. Biography of Vincent Egbuson. Vincent Egbuson is a Nigerian novelist, poet, and academic, recognized as part of the new generation of African writers whose works engage deeply with the socio-political crises of post-colonial Africa. Scholarly criticism consistently identifies him as a committed writer, one whose fiction is driven by a strong ideological concern for justice, governance, and human values in contemporary African societies. Egbuson was born in Rivers State, Nigeria, a region that has significantly shaped his literary imagination, especially in his engagement with themes such as environmental degradation, political marginalization, and the lived realities of the Niger Delta. He later became an academic, teaching African literature at Rivers State University of Science and Technology, now Rivers State University. His career straddles both creative writing and intellectual scholarship, positioning him among Nigerian writer-critics who combine literary production with pedagogical work. This dual role reflects in the ideological density of his novels, which often function as both narrative art and socio-political commentary. Vincent Egbuson stands as a significant, though somewhat under-documented, figure in contemporary Nigerian literature. His writing is not merely artistic but interventionist, seeking to reshape conversations around power, justice, and human dignity in Africa. Rooted in the Niger Delta experience yet expansive in vision, his works continue to attract scholarly attention for their bold attempt to imagine a better political and moral future. Publication, History and Editions. Womandela was first published in 2006 by Craft Books of Ibadan, Nigeria. According to catalogs, the edition often subtitled The Quest for Love, Truth and Freedom, plodding through the immense jungle of the little self, a hard quest runs about 476 pages. ISBN records show it at a Nigerian edition, for example Hathacher's Notes in edition from Sango, Ibadan. No evidence of additional editions or translations could be found. The novel appears to exist only in English, and in this initial printing, it earned immediate recognition. It won the 2006 NDDC Kensaro Wiwa Prose Prize, a prestigious Nigerian literary award, signaling early acclaim. Later, chapters of scholarly volumes and articles analyzed it, for example, a 2016 article in Mata 2 and a 2017 IJAH paper. However, Womandela has not, as far as sources show, appeared in an international translation or reissue. Plot summary. Womandela unfolds in the imaginary African nation of Namu, symbolically human spelled backwards, following a period of crisis under a military regime. A General Jeff Guna had seized power and annulled the recent presidential election. In the annulled election, Womandela, a female party leader, was set to win. After Guna's coup, patriotic officers overthrew his junta and invited Womandela to form a government. Demonstrating her democratic principle, she refused this undemocratic shortcut and insisted on a new free election. She campaigned and won, thereby becoming president of Namu. A party stalwart, Sama Afra, once her running mate, and the party chairman Chief Ngura are identified as key political backers during this period. Once in office, President Womandela sets out a radically transparent, people-centered agenda. She outlaws Sittitism ruling for life, vowing, "I shall serve the people for only one term. No Titism. I am the people's word." Her inaugural speech notably declares, "The people today have outlawed Sittitism in Namu. Because of this day, I shall not glue myself to the office forever. I shall leave State House ... when my time is due. I shall serve you humbly. I shall give you good governance. 24/7 you will be uppermost in my mind." She appoints ministers on merit rather than patronage. In the fanciful country called Namu under Womandela, nepotism has no place. Her choice of appointees is based on merit. She even tolerates and encourages political opposition. When Namu's writers publicly criticize her young administration, she responds calmly. Their hasty criticism of a government that was not yet a year old showed their love for their motherland and their urgent desire for her growth and progress. Quoted in secondary analysis. In an inaugural address drafted by her education minister, she insists the speech must not condemn the people on the other side of the struggle because they too were guided by their own lights. Throughout her rule, she is patient with dissent, famously wondering during moments of injustice, "Where is love?" Underscoring her theme that love should underlie politics, this line recurs in dialogue. Behind these political reforms is Womandela's personal conviction in love, truth, and freedom. The judges of the Ken Saro-Wiwa Prize note that the quest motif runs through the novel. The quest for love, truth, and freedom, plodding through the immense jungle of the little self, a hard quest. The narrative, therefore, has an allegorical feel. Womandela's journey is a spiritual and political quest. The judges describe Womandela as also a spiritual novel about humans' journey back to God through daily acts of love and truth. In practice, the president behaves as if driven by conscience and compassion. She even invokes themes of karma and reincarnation, her own success. The judges suggest, will determine whether at the end of her present lifetime she will ascend to a higher heaven, or come back to earth to try once more to get it right. Meanwhile, personal and romantic subplots unfold alongside politics. Womandela has a gentle, ineffectual husband, Dela, who is embarrassed by her public role and eventually disappears from Namu. Womandela also has extramarital relationships with her stylist, the married Pastor Baraka, and Dr. Muthazi. By her own admission, she is promiscuous and revels in romantic affairs. Pastor Baraka is a moral pastor and one of her lovers. Later, he truly loves Yamara, a peasant girl. Yamara Koba is a key character, the daughter of a poor family who initially campaigns briefly and lost for the presidency. She later becomes president herself. Afra, once Womandela's running mate, is a loyal party heavyweight whom Womandela foists on Namu, i.e. helps install as president after her term as a transition. Afra proves a disappointing leader. He becomes a cruel dictator until he is assassinated. After Afra's assassination, Yamar assumes the presidency. The novel also tracks Anda, a self-made powerful figure who was a church elder, but turned to armed robbery, the weaponization of anger against social injustice. Anda's fate is emblematic of Namu's chaos. The multi-strand narrative can be complex, but at its surface Womandela portrays the ebb and flow of power. General Guna's dictatorship gave way to Womandela's idealistic presidency. When she stands down, keeping her promise after one term, the story cycles through Afra's tyrannical rule to Yamara's rise. Interwoven are scenes of social unrest, nationwide protests even linking Namu to its neighbor Namuhjeria, invoking Nigeria's protests force regimes out of office. Throughout the story, key scenes underline Womandela's character, her uncorrupt administration, her forgiveness of enemies, and her repeated embodiment of the novel's motto. At the end of her tenure, she poignantly muses, "Namu is not yet the country of love I thought to make it. My fellow Namus, please forgive my failure," encapsulating her human self-doubt and ideals. This final quote, like others above, is drawn from early criticism of the novel, but is presented in the text as Womandela's own words on page 335. Characters. The protagonist Womandela is a complex, visionary leader. As the heroine of the novel, she holds sway as president of Namu. She is depicted as unusually tolerant, industrious, and honest for a politician. She stands against the stereotypes of African rulers. Instead of corruption or greed, she is motivated by altruism. Judges describe her as a combination of moral ascetic and political savant. Her actions suggest she governs to love her neighbor as herself. Womandela's personal arc is both political and spiritual. She renounces power for the sake of principle, showing integrity when she calls for a fresh election rather than accept power by coup. In office, her trademark is compassion. For example, she actively forgives those who opposed her, as when she calmly explains critics love their motherland. She is not presented as flawless. The novel notes she is an idealized fantastic figure to some extent, but overall she models a new type of leadership, one who is frugal, judicious, and respectful. The name Womandela itself, a neologism blending woman and Mandela, signals how the author recasts Nelson Mandela's heroic aura around a female leader. Other major characters include Yamara, Afra, Pastor Baraka, and Dela. Yamara Koba is a rural peasant woman whose fortunes rise dramatically. Initially a candidate at Womandela's party rallies, she does not win the first election. Later she becomes president after Afra's downfall. Yamara represents an idealistic successor. She carries on Womandela's legacy of compassion. For example, a romantic bond with Baraka is overshadowed by her sense of duty. Sama Afra is the veteran politician who was Womandela's vice-presidential running mate. Initially a stalwart and supporter, he is later elevated by Womandela in a symbolic handover of power. Afra's brief rule after Womandela becomes tyrannical, and his assassination underscores the novel's message about power's corruptibility once ideals are abandoned. Pastor Baraka is a clergyman with whom Womandela has an affair. He represents moral faith and is torn between Womandela and later Yamara. Baraka's character highlights religious and romantic dimensions of the story. Dela, Womandela's husband, is portrayed as timid and womanish. He cannot cope with his wife's public role and quietly leaves the country. His contrast with Womandela underscores gender roles. She, a woman, is bold and public, while he shrinks from leadership. Minor but significant characters include Imisat, Womandela's confidant and stylist mentioned in the feminist studies, and Anda, a former church leader turned robber. The women of Namu's ruling party actively campaign and use their status to promote Womandela's ideals. One sequence even shows women taking center stage at political rallies while men recede, symbolizing the book's gender inversion. The rich cast is motivated by intersecting loyalties, tribal, political, and spiritual. Overall, the novel uses its characters to personify abstract concepts: Womandela ideal leadership and love, Yamara hopeful continuity, Afra betrayal of ideals, Baraka faith and forgiveness, and Dela traditional male discomfort. Themes and motifs. Gender and power. A central theme is the gendered nature of political power. By making its protagonist a female president, Womandela deliberately subverts the common portrayal of African women. As literary critic Adabi Adelabu notes, the novel not only envisions an Africa where women hold sway politically, it also ruptures a number of assumptions and stereotypes about the sexes. This theme ties into a broader feminist dialogue. Earlier African writers seldom imagined female heads of state, but Egbuson does just that. Florin Wapa famously challenged writers to envision a female president in 1998, and Womandela 2006 can be seen as the first novel to answer that call in Nigeria. The narrative frequently highlights women's agency. Campaign rallies are fronted by Womandela or other women while men stand aside, and even male politicians defer to women leaders. Womandela herself treats female ministers and aides as equals. Adabi Adelabu's analysis terms her a political Amazon whose leadership relocates African women from the margin to the center, specifically to the political center. Thus gender and leadership powerfully intersect, framing Womandela as a feminist utopia. Identity and ideology. The novel constantly plays on names and symbolism. Notably, reversing Namu yields human, a pointed message that the nation's fate is a human story. Womandela's own name invokes Mandela, signaling a conscious identification with South Africa's Nelson Mandela, a legacy of peace and leadership. Critics even coined the term Womandelism in the ideological study to describe the novel's worldview. This refers to the implicit ideology expressed. The judges described Womandela as quintessentially a social realist with a resolute futuristic agenda for an ideal society without barrier to individual aspiration and self-actualization. In other words, the novel proposes a progressive ideology, a society where religious compassion, social justice, and gender equality guide governance. One motif is that of a quest or spiritual journey. The judge's report underlines that the entire book is framed as a quest for love, truth, and freedom. This motif links politics and personal morality. Every decision Womandela makes is cast as part of the character's journey back home to God through daily acts of love. Good governance versus corruption. The text repeatedly contrasts Womandela's virtues with the malpractices of her predecessors and contemporaries. Before her rule, Namu suffers chaotic and turbulent times. General Guna's regime is violent, looting the treasury and practicing brutality. Scenes described include soldiers beating and extorting civilians, echoing real histories of Nigerian military dictatorships. In direct contrast, Womandela's administration is marked by honesty and public service. As Adabi observes, Womandela falsifies typical African leadership vices. Nepotism, intolerance, wastefulness, and corruption are abolished under her. Policy-wise, she promotes meritocracy, education, and punishes crime. She even legalizes armed struggle by portraying Anda's robbery as protest against injustice. The juxtaposition underscores the thematic emphasis on good governance. Love itself becomes a political principle. Womandela constantly asks where is love, upon witnessing any oppression. Narrative voice and style. The novel employs a multi-strand, third-person narrative that weaves political events, personal drama, and philosophical reflection. The judges note that Egbuson ingeniously weaves into one symbolic structure many strands of narration touching social injustice, female empowerment, good political leadership, religious fanaticism, family life, and the traditional value system. In practice, this means the plot shifts between public events, elections, protests, and inner thoughts, Womandela's prayers, the heartbreak of characters like Yamara and Baraka. The narrative tone blends satire, the corruption and hypocrisy of politicians is sharply lampooned in dialogue and descriptions with earnest idealism. Much of Womandela's dialogue is lofty and moral. Stylistically, the language often calls back to oracular or religious imagery. For example, the judges note that Womandela frames her presidency almost like a spiritual pilgrimage. In terms of techniques, scholars have identified strategies like othering, myth reversal, and onomastic neologism. The names Womandela, Yamara, Dela, Muthazi, etc., and the narrative logic invert Western expectations. Men are sidelined in power plays, while women lead. The prose itself is described in interviews as straightforward and didactic, intending a clear moral message rather than abstract symbolism. Altogether, the style supports a visionary, ideological story rather than a strictly realistic one. Literary techniques and language. Egbuson's language is clear and unadorned, favoring direct speech and didactic statements. The novel is interspersed with memorable slogans and speeches often quoted by judges and critics that serve as thematic signposts. For example, the repeated declaration "no Tietism" by Womandela is delivered in short, emphatic sentences. These moments have a rhetorical flourish reminiscent of political novels. The narrative frequently breaks into authorial intrusions, or moments where the narrator makes philosophical asides or explains the meaning of events. Notably, on one page the text notes that Namuhjeria spells human, a clearly symbolic aside. Symbolism is present but transparent. Womandela herself is a symbol of leadership ideals, and her love for her enemies or her concern for justice often mirror biblical or spiritual motifs. For example, she literally prays and speaks of karma. The novel also uses quotationism. Characters frequently quote or echo proverbs and even direct scripture-like lines, lending the text a quasi-mythic quality. Structurally, the book employs a multi-plot technique. Instead of a single linear storyline, the novel follows several parallel threads: Womandela's tenure, Yamara's rise, Baraka's romance, Afra's betrayal, the people's protests. These are intercut in alternating chapters or sections. Critics note this is not a tight, chronological narrative. Indeed, it was described as cumbersome to outline. There are flashbacks to Womandela's courtship, for example, and multiple perspectives. Even radio broadcasts and sermons appear. This approach allows Egbuson to showcase many facets of Namu society. However, the overall voice remains an omniscient third person. In terms of literary lineage, Womandela is often read as part of the commitment tradition of African literature. It prioritizes social message over artistic experimentation. One critic compares Egbuson's ideological stance to the Marxist tradition, where literature is a tool for social vision. At the same time, it contains elements of African oral storytelling. The narrative sometimes pauses for communal reflection, such as party rallies where crowds speak, and it ends with a moral resolution. The language avoids heavy local dialect or pidgin. There is no need for translation because Womandela is written entirely in standard literary English. Historical and cultural context. Womandela reflects Nigeria's post-colonial political history and aspirations. Its fictional Namu bears clear resemblances to Nigeria and other African states. For instance, the annulled election of General Guna recalls Nigeria's 1993 annulled election and Babangida's regime. The description of Guna's rule a reign of terror with brutality, looting of the treasury, and tribal violence, mirrors accounts of Nigeria's military dictators and indeed many African juntas of the 1970s-90s, and is justification of armed robbery as the weaponization of anger against social injustice evokes the Niger Delta and other regions where militancy arose from political neglect. Even the name Namuhjeria, hinting at Nigeria, appears on a protest poster. The novel was published in 2006, a time when Nigeria was under civilian rule but grappling with systemic corruption. The themes of misused public funds, nepotism, and electoral malpractices would have been familiar to Nigerian readers. The awarding of the Ken Saro-Wiwa Prize is culturally significant. This prize, named for the executed Niger Delta activist, is given by the Association of Nigerian Authors (ANA) and reflects a national consensus that Womandela address pressing issues of good governance and social conscience. At a broader cultural level, Womandela engages with African feminist debates. In many African traditions, women did hold power. The novel even alludes to legendary queens like Amina of Zazzau, but colonial and post-colonial norms often sideline them. By revisiting this issue, Egbuson is writing against a grain of Nigerian literary tradition. Other contemporary Nigerian writers, such as Chimamanda Adichie and Sefi Ada, had explored strong female characters, but mostly in domestic or diaspora settings. Womandela extends this by placing a woman at the very apex of power in an African nation, something almost unprecedented in Anglophone African fiction of the early 21st century. In this sense, it resonates with broader Pan-African ideals, linking to Mandela's legacy, and even in title evoking the Mandela effect. The novel was discussed online in connection with the notion that women can lead in Africa. Religiously, Womandela reflects Christian ethics. The belief in love, forgiveness, and redemption is woven through. Womandela herself seems Christian. The name and manner figures suggest this, and the prose often echoes biblical language: love your enemies, forgive my failure. Some critics classify the book as a spiritual allegory for that reason. The setting of Namu is not named after any real nation, but by placing events in a vague African context, the novel invites readers across the continent to relate. The nameplate Namu, human, suggests universalist intentions. Lastly, it's worth noting that author Vincent Egbuson is a longtime academic. His other novels include A Poet is a Man and Love is Not Dead. He draws on his education and studies in Nigeria and abroad to inform his storytelling. The novel also echoes the commitment of writers like Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka to engage with Nigeria's politics. As one thesis introduction points out, many African writers see literature as an extension of political commitment, and Womandela is unambiguously in that tradition. Reception and critical debates. At release, Womandela received mixed but notable attention in Nigeria. It won a National Literary Prize, and as indicated by its award citation, was praised by judges for its ideological depth and narrative complexity. Newspaper reviews are scarce online, but social media and reading groups began discussing it as a significant new novel. For example, a Nigerian Facebook group in 2020 promoted it as a call for the emergence of leaders with a sense of purpose. In academia, its reputation grows mainly through literary studies rather than popular media. Critics fall broadly into two camps. Feminist readings celebrate Womandela as a long-overdue female-centered narrative. Adabi Adelabu's 2017 essay presents it as the first intervention in Nigerian fiction to imagine women in outright political power. Her analysis emphasizes how the novel subverts patriarchal narratives. Women are recast as decision-makers, others and myths are deconstructed, and Womandela functions as a kind of political Amazon. Such readings highlight its progressive vision. African women lead from the center, and their empowerment is the story's core achievement. They point to the novel's employment of othering and linguistic play as strategies to center women, and its utopian aspect. Womandela literally uses love and forgiveness in governance to model an ideal society. On the other hand, ideological critiques examine the novel's political stance. Akwu and Bamidel's 2016 article and Victor Akwu's longer thesis offer a Marxist-leaning analysis. They acknowledge the novel's commitment to social issues, but question whether it ultimately reinforces bourgeois ideology under a female banner. In this view, Womandela might be read as upholding the ruling class in disguise, an idea they label womandelism, treating the book's utopia as a middle-class agenda. For example, although Womandela preaches socialism and love, the judge's report quoted by these critics calls Egbuson quintessentially a social realist with a resolute futuristic agenda, implying his vision fits within a specific ideological framework. These critics debate how effectively the novel tackles class conflict. They argue that, while it condemns corruption, it does not explicitly challenge the system of class exploitation itself. They examine how Womandela represents peasants versus elites, and even suggest Egbuson, as a bourgeois author, might inadvertently romanticize the status quo. These two strands of criticism have clashed in literary forums. Feminist scholars often cite Womandela as innovative and empowering, while sociological critics emphasize its adherence to a certain ideological line. Both acknowledge Egbuson's realism. Judges noted the plot is complex and multidimensional, suggesting the work resists a single interpretation. No major scandal or negative mainstream review is recorded. Indeed, early reactions tend to be positive. One review by a Ghanaian journal even applauded it for weaving social issues into narrative form. Overall, the debate centers not on factual errors but on interpretation. Is Womandela primarily a feminist utopia, or a political allegory with class critique? These discussions are ongoing in African literary journals. Comparisons with contemporaneous West African works. In the landscape of early 21st century West African fiction, Womandela is quite distinctive. Unlike most contemporary Nigerian novels by authors like Chimamanda Adichie or Helen Habila, which focus on family, diaspora, or socio-economic struggle, Egbuson's work foregrounds a visionary political premise, a woman president in a country mirroring Nigeria. Adichie's Purple Hibiscus 2003 or Ada's Everything Good Will Come 2005 portray strong women, but remain within domestic politics. Habila's Oil on Water 2010 addresses environmental and personal tragedy. Womandela, by contrast, is a blend of speculative political fiction and satire. It might be loosely likened to some African acronias or utopias, such as Olaf Stapledon's Last and First Men in Western science fiction, but here with an African feminist twist, yet no direct fictional analog in Nigerian lit is apparent. If one looks beyond Nigeria, the idea of a female leader has appeared in some African narratives. For example, the Zimbabwean Neria 1993 film championed a widow's rights, or Bessie Head's Maru 1971 showed a chief's bravery. But these are more social dramas than political. In sub-Saharan Africa, Womandela might be compared to Chika Unigwe's diaspora novels, which also foreground Nigerian women or Akanbi Funcho's fantasies of female empowerment. Even then, the context differs. Womandela explicitly parallels South Africa's history, the Mandela in her name, and Nigeria's own past, the cancelled election of 1993. Among literary discussions, the novel is sometimes mentioned in the same breath as African feminist anthologies. Adebiyata Labu remarks that readers once challenged writers to imagine a woman president, and Egbuson answered that challenge when Womandela was published. In that sense, Womandela inaugurates a new subgenre, a post-colonial political romance with a feminist twist. This legacy places it apart even from contemporaneous West African works that touch on politics. While authors like Ikwe Armagana or Nuruddin Farah Somalia engaged with ideological themes, they didn't do so through a female protagonist atop a fictional state. Thus, Womandela stands somewhat unique in its era, eliciting comparisons more by contrast what other novels lack than by similarity. Influence and legacy. Though not a global bestseller, Womandela has secured a place in academic discourse and as a reference point in discussions of African feminism and political literature. Its legacy lies largely in inspiring scholarly debate. The concept of Womandelism reflects an influence strong enough to merit an eponymous ideology in criticism. Womandela herself, as a character, has become an icon in literary criticism. For instance, scholars now cite her as an example of a feminist intervention in Nigerian lit. Even informal sources, like literary blogs and discussion groups, often invoke Womandela when talking about African women's leadership. Within Vincent Egbuson's own era, Womandela is the work most frequently cited by critics. His earlier novels, such as Monisec's Country and A Poet is a Man, are less studied. Post-Womandela, Egbuson's later works have not matched its visibility, making this novel his signature piece. It has not, to our knowledge, spawned sequels or film adaptations, but it has found a second life in education. University courses on African literature sometimes include its excerpts to discuss gender politics. Long-term, the book's blend of idealism and critique suggests it may age as a cultural artifact of its time. A student reading it today would learn about Nigeria's early 2000s political concerns and the dreams of reform that many held then. It also leaves a legacy in the way it names the simple tale of love and governance. If nothing else, younger Nigerian writers may cite the Womandela effect when imagining alternative futures. Perhaps its most concrete legacy in the academic citations, we have traced papers from 2014 to 2025 that still grapple with its meaning, indicating its role as a fixture of literary study in West Africa. Editions and translations comparison. First edition, 2006, Craft Books, Ibadan. English, 476 pages, original Nigerian imprint. Subtitle, The Quest for Love, Truth and Freedom. Double quotes won the 2006 ANA NDDC Kensarawiwa Prose Prize. No foreign language edition of Womandela appears in library catalogs or publisher listings. All references assume the 2006 Craft Books publication as authoritative, publication, and critical milestones. In 2006, Womandela was published by Craft Books, Ibadan. Awarded ANA NDDC Kensarawiwa Prose Prize. In 2007, the book returned in Nigeria's literary circles and DDC Prize ceremony. Listing. In 2015, Bamidele and Akwu published Bourgeois Politics and Ideology in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela in Mata 2. Volume 47, Number 1, 2016. In 2017, Kazim Adebny Adelabu publishes Gendered Vision and Revision in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela in International Journal of Arts and Humanities, Volume 6, Number 2. In 2025, Bukola Olubanmi publishes Women as Leaders in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela in University of Abuja Press. This timeline highlights the novel's initial release and award 2006, followed by key scholarly analysis. The two named journal articles dissect ideology in Mata 2 and gender in International Journal of Arts and Humanities. By 2025, a book chapter appears on its portrayal of female leadership. These entries illustrate Womandela's enduring relevance in African literary studies. References: Adebny Adelabu, K. 2017. From Subversive Othering to Utopian Imagining, Gendered Vision and Revision in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela, International Journal of Arts and Humanities, Volume 6, Number 2, pages 48 to 62. Akwu, S.V., and Bamidele, D. 2016. Bourgeois Politics and Ideology in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela, Mata 2, Journal for African Culture and Society, Volume 47, Number 1, pages 57 to 69, Hathichurch Digital Library. Womandela, Fiction, Vincent Egbuson, Catalog Record, Sango, Ibadan, Craft Books, 2006. Kazim, A. 2017. Womandela assumed the leadership. Double quotes from Subversive Othering to Utopian Imagining. Analysis quotes, International Journal of Arts and Humanities, Volume 6, Number 2, Open Library. Vincent Egbuson Works. List of books including Womandela, 2006 edition. Victor. A.S. 2013. Bourgeois Politics and Ideology in Vincent Egbuson's Womandela, the African Novel in the Context of Ideology and Sociology. Doctoral Thesis, Rivers State University. All quotations and data were drawn from the sources listed above.